Okay, welcome to Psych 101. Today we're going to start our chapter on therapies. It is our last chapter, and we're going to try to talk about this stuff. We're not going to get to all of it. We'll get through about half of it. Okay, so let's get to it. Before we actually talk about therapies, I want to first present some research, some figures. There's a graph here that basically is titled up there. It says U.S. Adult Mental Health Treatment, 2004 to 2008. Okay, so this is old, but this is what's in your book. Okay, so I'm showing you this graph. And it shows the percentage of adults who are in mental health treatments, who are receiving some kind of treatment, okay, for mental health, for psychological problems. And you can see it's been about pretty steady, right? About 12, maybe 13% of adults throughout the years. It might be rising a little bit, but it's pretty steady. So more than 1 out of every 10 adults is receiving some kind of treatment for some mental health issue, whether it's depression or anxiety or something like that. Okay, so there is no shame in getting treatment. Okay, a lot of people feel that that they do feel shame that you have to be crazy to get treatment or something like that. That's not the case. Sometimes you just need help. You need help coping with difficulties, or you have certain issues, and a lot of people are getting treatment. And this is the percentage of children ages 8 to 15 who are receiving treatment for certain anxiety disorders, I should say. So anxiety disorders, you can see about a third of children receive some kind of treatment. Mood disorders, right? You can see, this is the, okay, so about 1/3 to 1/2 of U.S. adolescents with mental disorders receive treatment. Okay, so this is not about everybody, okay? Those that have psychological problems, those students that have basically problems, this is the percentage of them that actually receive some treatment. So those with anxiety disorders, about 1/3 or so receive treatment. Those with mood disorders, not quite half, right? Conduct disorder, close to half. When you are underage, so to speak, before you're an adult, when you are in school, you are entitled to treatment if you have problems. Okay, let's keep going. Let's talk about psychotherapy itself. So let's talk about these therapies. The therapies are actually, there's different kinds of therapies, and they're called, some of them are called psychotherapies. Psychotherapy, we're talking about therapy for the mind, okay? So psychological techniques to treat psychological disorders. It's called psychotherapy because it's for the mind and therapy, right? And there's different kinds, okay? The first type of therapies we're going to talk about are called insight therapies. These are designed to give insight into people's feelings, motivations, behavior to help them get better. Okay, so the logic here is that if you understand why you feel the way you do, why you do what you do, right, why you have these problems, that you'll be able to get better. You just need to understand where they're coming from. You need to be aware of them. Okay, we're going to talk about these. These includes therapies like psychoanalytic therapy, client-centered therapy, and Gestalt therapy that we're going to talk about. So let's get to those. The first type of therapy is called psychoanalytic therapy or psychoanalysis. This is based on Freud's theory. It's the gist of this, the logic of it is that it's designed to bring unconscious thoughts, feelings, etc. to conscious awareness. Remember, Freud's theory says that a lot of our behavior, our thinking, and our feelings are actually controlled by things that are in the unconscious, things that we're not aware of, things we don't have control of, right? And in order for us to get better, we need to bring that stuff that's hidden away in the unconscious, we need to bring it to consciousness, to conscious awareness. Conscious awareness that's the stuff that we can focus on, that we can think of. That's the stuff we do control. So we need to bring it out so that we can make sense of it, so that we can control it. And the way Freud's therapy does this is by using certain techniques. One technique that is used is called free association. Free association is a technique where you just speak freely about whatever comes to mind. It's basically a type of talk therapy. Now, in the movies, you see that basically you lie down on some kind of couch, you look up at the ceiling, and you talk about whatever comes to mind, right? Whatever's on your mind. Now, the therapist might prompt you with something, might ask you a question and, ask you something like, tell me about your mother, right? And you're supposed to speak freely about whatever comes to mind. Whatever comes to mind about your mother, you're just supposed to say it. Or tell me about your father, or tell me about your childhood. And you free associate. You just speak freely about whatever comes to mind. It's like thinking out loud. You're not supposed to be afraid that the therapist is going to judge you or going to frown at you or say something mean. They're there to hear you out, okay? It is hoped that as you free associate, you're going to engage in what's called transference. Transference is when you project those positive and negative feelings that you have for authority figures to the analyst. Let me explain that. So let's say you're in therapy and you are angry, okay? You're a very angry person. You have a lot of anger management problems, okay? Let's say that's why you're in therapy. And the therapist tells you to speak freely, right? It tells you to, tell me about your father or something like that. So you start talking about your father. And as you start talking about your father, you start remembering how he basically neglected the family, how he was awful and abusive, right? And maybe he even left the family after a while. And you start basically getting mad. You start getting upset when you remember these things. You're supposed to let these feelings out and project them, these positive or negative feelings, whatever comes out, to the analyst. So maybe you start feeling angry. And what you're supposed to do is get angry, get mad at the analyst. Your father isn't there to take it or to hear it. The therapist is, so you let it out and you project it at them, those negative feelings. If there are positive feelings, if you start remembering how dad was wonderful and how he loved you and made you feel safe and secure, then you start feeling, wonderful and happy about the analyst, about the therapist. And I do want to point out that sometimes when people project these feelings that they have for their mom, their mother, or their father, right, some childhood authority figure, sometimes people fall in love with the therapist, because what's happening from the Freudian point of view is they're letting these positive feelings out and they're projecting them toward the analyst. So they're falling in love with the therapist, and that really means they're in love with their own father or their own mother or something like that. But you're supposed to transfer these feelings and let them out. Now, they also help you engage in something called dream analysis. They analyze your dreams. From the Freudian point of view, dreams represent hidden wishes, desires, unresolved issues. Okay, so dreams are where a lot of this unconscious material kind of surfaces. It comes out in your dreams. So they want you to talk about your dreams. Okay, and from the Freudian point of view, dreams have, remember, both literal meaning, the manifest content, and symbolic meaning, the latent content. And they want you to talk about your dreams, and they want to figure out what they mean. What's the symbolic meaning of the dreams? All this is designed to help you figure out what is happening to you, and help you understand where it comes from. I'll tell you about some Freudian dream symbols. From the Freudian point of view, if you dream about flying, for instance, that's supposed to represent feeling free. If you dream about hats or purses or things like that, that's supposed to represent genitals. If you dream about falling, that's supposed to represent giving into sexual desire. So there's a lot of dream symbols, and some of them are very sexual. A lot of them are actually sexual, okay, from the Freudian point of view. But they try to help you analyze these dreams, to try to help you make sense of what it may be that's happening to you. Let's keep going. As therapists, as the psychoanalysis, as the therapy continues, the analyst helps you interpret, helps you kind of gain insight into the unconsciousness. So they're there to try to help you make sense of it. At first, they might try to make a little interpretation, might say something like, it seems we keep coming back to your father. You keep talking about your father. I think there's something there that you need to tell me, okay? So the therapist is trying to help you, or the analyst, it's called the analyst from the Freudian point of view, is try to help you gain insight, try to help you gain some understanding into what is hidden away in the unconscious, what your issues may be, where they may be coming from. At first, you might not believe it, right? And you might not, or you might be resisting the therapeutic process and might not see what the therapist is trying to tell you. And eventually, if you don't figure it out, they'll just come right out and tell you something like, it seems to me that you're in love with your father, right? That's why you are angry. That's why you have problems. You can't let go. You're still in love with your father, and you're very hurt and upset about what he did to you and your family. So there they are, right? Trying to interpret this for you, trying to help you make sense of it. At first, you might say, no, that's a bunch of nonsense. How can you say that, right? You're a pervert, that kind of stuff. And they might tell you something like, you're in denial. You need to accept this if you're going to get better. And maybe with time, you come to agree with them and you admit it, right? That it is true, right? That you are in love with your father and that you're hurt about, him leaving you and mistreating you and things like that, right? And you start feeling hurt again and you start crying and things like that. And what you're supposed to do is work through those past conflicts and traumas. So relive the past, experience it again in your mind, so to speak, as the therapist helps you make sense of it, and kind of work through it. And release that blocked emotion, undo those fixation, right? When you cry, when you let the anger out, you release the emotion. That's called catharsis. And that's supposed to help you get better. And as you're doing this, the therapist helps you make sense of what is going on. Let me give you an example of catharsis so you understand it. If you ever had a really bad day, right, and you feel really hurt, you feel like crying, right? And then you get home and there's mommy or daddy, or let's say your roommate or your significant other, and they can tell you've had a bad day. And they tell you something like, all right, you've had a bad day. Come here, right? Give me a hug. It's okay. Let it out, right? And you let it out and you cry like a baby. You cry and you cry. And what happens? You feel better afterward, right? You let out the emotion and you feel better. That's kind of the way catharsis works. That's what's supposed to happen over time, right? As you talk about this stuff, you relive it, you make sense of it, you release the emotion and you let it go, right? That's how you get better. Remember, right? The animation, Frozen, right? Let it go. Remember the song, right? I'm not sure it's about Freud. I don't think it is. But that's the logic of this, right? Let it out, let it go, and make sense of it. You need to get that stuff that's bottled up inside out, make sense of it, relive it, release the emotion, and let it go. That's kind of the way it works. And the image there, you see there, the so-called psychoanalytic couch, or might look like a little bed. You lie on that, you look up at the ceiling, and you talk about your mother, your father, your childhood, something like that. From the Freudian point of view, the problems you have to do with your childhood, the stuff that you experienced in childhood. And that often, of course, has to do with parents, with family, that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to so much do with the present, it's to do with the past. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about other insight therapies. Another insight therapy is called Person-Centered Therapy. Person-Centered Therapy is based on Carl Rogers' theory. Remember that what was central to Carl Rogers' theory, right? Unconditional positive regard, right? Remember, from Carl Rogers' point of view, we all deserve unconditional positive regard. We all need acceptance and approval, regardless of what we look like, what we may think, what we've done, right? Unconditional positive regard is what we should have gotten all along, so that we can love and to learn to love and accept ourselves, but we didn't get it. So there we are, messed up, right? We're depressed, we're anxious, right? We're angry, and we're in therapy. So the therapist tries to undo this by providing you with unconditional positive regard, by making you feel loved and accepted, no matter what you've been through, what you look like, what you've done. If you receive too much conditional positive regard in your life, that causes defensiveness, rigidity, anxiety, anger, and ultimately, rejection of the self, right? So you're in therapy, and the therapist is there to provide you with the environment you should have had all along. The goal of therapy is for the client to become fully functioning and accept him or herself, right? If you receive unconditional positive regard, if you receive that love and acceptance unconditionally, you're more likely to accept and love yourself, right? And when you do that, you're more likely to function at your best. Because when you're anxious, when you're depressed, when you feel miserable, when you don't accept yourself and you think there's something wrong with you, you don't function very well. But I haven't told you much about the therapy yet and what happens. Here's some more information about it. First, what the therapist doesn't do. The therapist doesn't suggest reasons for your behavior. The therapist is not there to tell you what is wrong with you. Okay, it's not like Freudian therapy. They're not going to tell you that you're in love with your father or your mother or something like that. They don't tell you what's wrong with you. And the reason they don't do that is because they don't know. You have to figure out what's wrong with you. They engage you in a therapeutic process where they have you talk without judging you, and they try to help you kind of engage in a process of self-discovery, where you ultimately come to realize what it is that is wrong with you. Maybe there is nothing wrong with you, and you need to realize that. They don't give you advice either. They don't tell you what you should do. They don't tell you things like, oh, you need to dump that person, get rid of that person, right? You need to get another job, right? That kind of stuff. They don't do that. That's what your friends do. They're not there to tell you what to do. And the reason they don't is because they don't know what you should do. You need to figure that out. They're there to help you discover that, to engage you in a process of self-discovery. What they do is they ask you questions. How are you feeling today? What do you want to talk about today? What's on your mind? They reflect, restate your statements. You might say something like, well, I don't feel very good today. They reflect that at you. They throw it back at you. You don't feel very good? They restate it. What do you mean? Do you mean you're depressed? You're feeling miserable? Right? I noticed that you have your arms crossed. You're defensive. Is there something bothering you? You know, they hint at things like that. They hint at your feelings. And they're there basically to help you kind of engage in this process of self-discovery, to get you to talk and think and basically discover what it is, if anything, that is wrong with you and what you should do about it. They're not there to mandate anything, to tell you what you should do. So that's why it's called person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy, because the person or the client is the one that determines what happens, what is talked about. Okay, they're there to give you unconditional positive regard, to make you feel accepted, no matter what you've done, how you may feel, what you may look like, and to engage you in this process of self-discovery, to give you the environment you should have had all along for you to become, you know, that fully functioning person that loves and accepts themselves. That's the way the therapy works. Let's keep going. Let's talk about another therapy called Gestalt Therapy. And this one works a lot better when we talk about it in class, because we have demonstrations in class, but we can't do the demonstration via Zoom, okay, because it involves behavior, okay? So Gestalt Therapy was developed by Fritz Perls, and it's based on Gestalt theory. Remember, Gestalt theory says that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Remember that, right? That sensation, perception is an active creation, something that can change, right? That theory, right? So the therapy tries to make people whole again. It tries to reawaken their emotions and sensations in the here and now. The logic of the therapy is the reason you have problems, the reason you're anxious, depressed, miserable, whatever it is because you are not whole. You are fragmented. You are disconnected. You're kind of missing some pieces. So they try to reawaken your emotions. They try to get you to be more real, right? They try to get you to live in the moment, live in the here and now, right? Not be fragmented because you keep living in the past and you're not really there, or you're living in the future, right? And you're always anxious and worrying about the future. So they try to get you to be whole, right? And reawaken you and live in the moment. They try to get you to be more real, more genuine. Now, this is how they get you to be more real, more genuine, right? Because the reason you have problems is because you're not being real, you're not being genuine, you're not being who you are, okay? So one thing they emphasize is self-awareness. Pay attention to what's happening, okay? Your gut feeling, you know that feeling you feel, right? When something isn't quite right, you need to pay attention to that. It tells you something is wrong. Like when you're with someone and you have that gut feeling that tells you, you know, I don't know if I trust this person. You need to be aware of that. You need to pay attention to that, and you need to act on that. It's telling you something. If you ignore it, you could get into trouble. You also need to be present-centered. You need to live in the moment. When you're in class, you need to pay attention to what's happening in class so that you can do well. When you're at work, you take care of work. When you're having fun with your friends or you're with your loved ones, have fun, be there, live in the moment. If you live in the moment, if you live in the present, you will be fine. You'll get the most out of school, out of work, out of your relationships. If you keep worrying about the future or you feeling hurt about the past, you're not living in the moment and you're not doing what you should do. You're not taking care of the present. They also emphasize face-to-face confrontations. There are people you need to talk to, that you need to confront and tell them how you feel. Maybe it's your mother, your father, and you need to tell them something. Maybe it's your significant other. Maybe it's your boss. You need to be real. You need to be genuine. You need to tell them what you think. Because when you deny things, when you distort things, when you're not being real, that causes problems for yourself. Right? You need to be genuine. You need to confront people, tell them how you feel. Could be positive things, could be negative things, but you need to be genuine, you need to be real, you need to tell people how you feel. And you also need to be responsible. They emphasize responsibility. You are responsible for how you feel, not other people. Okay? And they emphasize active speech for this. You shouldn't say, he makes me angry. What you need to say is, I am angry. They're my feelings, I own them. I decide if I'm angry. You shouldn't say, things like, because of him, I failed. No, you need to say, I failed. I'm responsible. I need to do something about this. And to get you to feel more responsible and be more genuine and confront people, they use something called the empty chair technique, where they put an empty chair in front of you and you imagine that there's somebody sitting there. It could be your mother, your father, your boss, your significant other. You decide who is sitting there. They're not sitting there for real. You imagine this and you confront them and you tell them how you feel. And you basically are supposed to be genuine and basically be whole, right? And if you are genuine, you are whole, and you do all these things, you will be better from the point of view of the therapy. That's the way it works. That's the way it's designed to work. And if we were in class, right, in person, we would do the empty chair technique and we would have that demonstration. And that would be really cool. Okay, let's keep going. Now we're going to talk about behavior therapies. Behavior therapies are different. They're not insight therapies. They don't deal with trying to help you understand things. Okay, that's not what they're about. Behavior therapies are about behavior, right? The logic of behavior therapies is that all behavior is learned. If you were depressed, you've learned it. If you're anxious, you've learned that. If you're aggressive, you've learned that. And if you've learned it, that means you can unlearn it. The goal is to teach new, more satisfying ways of behaving. Okay, to teach you better ways of behaving. Behave like you're not depressed, not be so anxious, not be so aggressive, right? All kinds of things. It includes many techniques, including classical conditioning techniques, operant conditioning techniques, and modeling. So there's several techniques, and let's talk about some of these. Let's talk about classical conditioning techniques. The first classical conditioning technique that we're going to talk about is called systematic desensitization. Systematic desensitization, if you understand what that means, then you kind of know what the therapy is about. So you need to become desensitized. Systematically, slowly, little by little, they desensitize you. So you gradually learn a new response. You gradually learn relaxation to something that causes you fear and anxiety. Okay? What you're supposed to do is develop a hierarchy of fears, a list of the least fearful situation to the most fearful situation. So you develop a list of things that scare you the most, scare you the least, right? And then you have others that scare you a little bit more, up to the most fearful situation. And the goal is for you to learn to relax at each step of the hierarchy. And it's an imagination technique. You imagine, right, going through that situation, and you imagine it. So let's say if you have a fear of spiders, right? Something that will make you afraid of spiders is, let's say, seeing a picture of a spider, right? So you imagine looking at a picture of a spider, and let's say you get a little bit anxious, and the therapist then tells you, okay, close your eyes. Imagine you're in your happy place, right? Take a deep breath, right? You're in your happy place. So they're trying to get you to relax. And then they tell you, okay, open your eyes, right? Think about the spider again. Again, you get anxious. And they tell you now, okay, now close your eyes. Imagine you're at your happy place again. Take a deep breath, relax, right? Once you can relax, imagining that spider every time, then you go on to the next step, and then the next step. And you learn to relax at each step until you can deal with the most fearful situation. Okay? And remember, you do this in your imagination, right? When you do it live, it's called in vivo desensitization. But the point is that you gradually become desensitized. They gradually have you overcome your fears by imagining them. When you do it live, it's called in vivo. desensitization, okay? It's an imagination technique. That is systematic desensitization. Another type of classical conditioning technique is called flooding. Flooding is an aggressive method of desensitization through great exposure. So rather than desensitizing you little by little, as in systematic desensitization, they can try to desensitize you or have you get over your fear all at once. That is flooding, okay? So if you're afraid of snakes, here's a bunch of snakes for you, and they're real snakes, right? You're either gonna learn to overcome your fear or you're gonna die. And of course, you're not gonna die. You don't die of fear, okay? You're afraid of heights? Guess what? We're gonna take you to the tallest building and you're gonna stand there and conquer your fear. You're afraid of public speaking? That's exactly what you're gonna do. So whatever you're afraid of, you're exposed to a whole bunch of it. And the truth is that you can only remain scared for so long. After about 8 minutes, your fear begins to subside and you begin to relax. And you go through this technique, you learn to conquer your fear by facing your fear all at once. No baby steps, no little by little. Okay? That's flooding. And here's a little comic here. It's from the comic called The Far Side, right? Dr. Gallagher's controversial techniques of dealing with the fear of heights, the fear of the dark, and the fear of snakes all at once. This is supposed to be funny, but obviously it wouldn't be like that. But whatever you're afraid of, you're exposed to a lot of it, right? And you either sink or swim, and you're not gonna sink, okay? You're gonna learn to conquer your fear. You may scream and yell, but eventually the fear will begin to subside. It's important that they don't do this with someone who has a heart condition or someone that, for instance, is too old, that might die of a heart attack. There are other behavior therapies. Another classical conditioning technique is called aversive conditioning. This is a technique that is used to eliminate undesirable behavior. This one is used to get rid of bad behavior. And for this technique, you are taught to associate an undesirable behavior with pain and discomfort. So if, let's say, you're an alcoholic, right? They teach you to associate, let's say you're an alcoholic and you drink and drive, right? Your problem is drinking and driving. So they teach you to associate drunk driving with a horrible car accident, okay? As the image is doing here, right? They've staged this horrible car accident. Cars are all mangled, people are dead, there's blood and there's all that stuff. And you can see there's an audience there. Those are probably students, right? They're trying to teach these students to associate drunk driving with something really bad, okay? Like death and dismemberment, right? They can also treat alcoholism by tearing the taste and smell with vomiting. What happens is they prescribe a medication, and while you're on the medication, every time you drink, you get very nauseous and you throw up. So you learn over time to associate alcoholism with getting sick and vomiting. Okay? That's the way it's supposed to work. There's another example, right? Let's say if you want to quit smoking, they can hook you up to electrodes, give you a bunch of, cigarettes to smoke, and they tell you, go ahead, have a smoke. And every time you smoke, they shock you. You smoke a cigarette, they shock you. Smoke another one, they shock you, right? To teach you to associate smoking with pain, with electric shock. Now, I know when you smoke out in the real world, you don't get shocked, but if you come to the clinic enough times and you go through enough training sessions, you will learn to associate smoking with pain, with shock, and you will eventually stop doing it. That's the way it's supposed to work. There are other operant conditioning techniques. There's one called behavior contracting. Okay, with behavior contracting, what you do is you set up a contract for behavior. Both the client and the therapist, they set up certain goals, certain behavioral goals, okay? And some goals are harder to meet than others. And you also set up reinforcements. You set up rewards that the client earns when he or she meets those goals. One example might be on the contract. might be that if you smoke less than 20 cigarettes, you get to reward yourself with bowling for 30 minutes. Okay, so maybe your problem is smoking and you set up this contract, right? If you can manage to smoke less than 20 cigarettes in a day, you get a reward. You get to bowl for 30 minutes. If you manage to smoke less than 10 cigarettes, 10 or less, you get to bowl for an hour. If you smoke less than 5, maybe you get to watch a movie or something like that. You know, then that could take like 2 hours. If you manage to smoke 1 cigarette or less in a day, you can treat yourself to a night out. You go out to eat or something like that, or you go to a restaurant, you know. So the harder it is to achieve the goal, the bigger the reward. Okay, that's the way behavior contracting works. And it can be used for many things. When I was in elementary school, I remember there was a homework contract, right? If you do your homework for a day, you get a little star, right? If you do your homework for like the whole week, you get like 5 stars or something like that. Or if you know, or it could be something else, right? If you do your homework for the whole week, you get, you know, you get, let's say, like an eraser, right? Or if you do the homework for the whole month, then maybe you get a free pencil or something like that. You get rewards for meeting these goals. And the harder it is to meet the goals, the bigger the reward. Okay, here's another example for you guys. Actually, no, I'll give you guys examples already. Let's go on to the next one. I give you guys some examples. So behavior contracting is just a contract for behavior. Okay, and by the way, it's important that both the client, the person who's trying to get better, and the therapist set up these goals together. The goals have to matter to the client. They cannot just be, you know, devised by the therapist, because if the client doesn't care about them, they're not going to work. Okay, and also the reinforcement. The clients care about the reinforcement, so they work on this together to set up this contract. They both sign, right, and they have to follow the contract. And if the client meets those goals, he gets certain rewards. Let's keep going. There's also something known as a token economy. A token economy is an operant conditioning technique. It's a behavior therapy. It works with, you know, they're trying to improve behavior, and it's an operant conditioning technique. And it's called the token economy. And what you do here is basically you earn tokens, reinforcers basically, for positive behavior. So just like when you go to Mulligan's or Chuck E. Cheese and you play these games and you get these tokens, and then you get to exchange your tokens for prizes, right? This is a similar thing. When you do what they want you to do, when you engage in positive behavior, good behavior, then you get tokens, and you can exchange the tokens for items, for privileges. There might be a vending machine that takes those tokens, or a store or something like that within the institution where they accept those tokens, and you can buy things, okay, with those tokens. It's like earning money, but it only works at the place where you earned it. Just like the tokens for Chuck E. Cheese only work at Chuck E. Cheese, and the ones for Mulligan's only work at Mulligan's. Okay, an example would be school dollars for good behavior. I've seen this, right? Schools that use this, they come up with their own fake money, okay? And they're called school dollars. And the teacher gives these out to students who are behaving the way she wants them to, or the way he wants them to. And I've seen them do this, right? The teacher might say, oh, I like the way little Jimmy is sitting there at his desk, you know, being quiet, being a good boy. Here's $1 for you, Jimmy, right? Or Sally has done her homework for the whole week. Sally gets a 5, right? Or Sam has, you know, has been good the whole month. Sam gets a 10, right? And the teacher gives out these school dollars, these tokens, to students who are behaving, who are doing their work, who are doing what they should. And the students gather these and they use them like money. There's a student store where they can buy a teddy bear, a candy bar, a bag of chips, or something like that. And this encourages good behavior. It's the way the economy works in the real world. This is the way the real world works. You do good behavior, right? You work hard, and then you get paid, right? And then you get to use that money to buy yourself things. Okay, that's what happens in the real world. If you don't do your work, you don't get paid, or you get fired, you don't get paid. Okay, so they teach you how to be responsible, right? How to do good behavior to earn those rewards. The thing is, the tokens only work where you earn them. They have been used in schools. They've been used in psychiatric institutions where they have people who are institutionalized because they're really schizophrenic or really depressed or something like that. It's been used in prisons. It's been used in organizations and businesses, places of work where they earn, work dollars or whatever it is that they can exchange for things that they can buy themselves there, aside from their paycheck, by the way. That's a token economy, and it can be very successful, okay? And here's an example of a token economy to reinforce exercise. Maybe somebody wants to lose weight and you want to reinforce exercise. So you set up this token economy. If they jog for half a mile, the person earns 4 tokens. If they jog for 1 mile, that's twice as much, right? They earn 8 tokens. They earn twice as many tokens. If they jog for 2 miles, it's 16 tokens. If they play tennis for an hour, they earn 4 tokens. Tennis for 2 hours, they earn 8 tokens, right? And they build up these tokens. And if they want to watch a movie, which they're going to be sitting on their butt for a couple of hours, they need to earn 30 tokens. If they want to go out to eat at a restaurant, they need to earn 100 tokens. Now, it may seem like watching a movie, sitting on your butt, eating at a restaurant is going to be counterproductive. That's not going to help you lose weight. But if you do the work ahead of time and you earn these tokens, you will already have burned enough calories that you can sit and relax and watch a movie if you earn 30 tokens. Or if you earn 100, okay, you burned many calories, okay? You can give yourself a reward and you get to eat at a restaurant if you have those 100 tokens. The bigger the reward, the more tokens you need to earn that reward. That's called a token economy. Use fake money, so to speak, or use tokens, right? That you earn from good behavior. And you use those tokens to basically for privileges, for items that you can get with those tokens, okay? Modeling, another technique. There's also modeling techniques, also behavior therapy. Modeling is a type of technique where you learn a desired behavior by observing. Okay, so here's the thing, modeling is powerful. We learn a lot of things by watching other people. We learn both good and bad behavior. Maybe you've learned to become an alcoholic or a drug addict because you've been around people who do those things. But you also learn good things, like how to be a good writer, how to drive a car, how to do math by observing others as well. So you can learn good behavior by observing. If you're afraid of snakes, if that's your problem, you can learn not to be so afraid of snakes. The therapist, handles a snake, models that behavior for it. It's not a poison snake. It's not a rattlesnake, right? Some harmless snake, and the therapist handles it. You see that it's no big deal, and then you get to try it. Now, modeling comes in many forms, by the way. This is just modeling in general. But sometimes you do it through your imagination, right? Where you imagine doing something, right? You could also do it live. That's live modeling, where you actually get to handle the snake, right? It comes in different forms, but the point is that whatever you're having trouble with, maybe being assertive or maybe handling a snake, whatever it is, public speaking, the therapist models that for you, shows you how it's done, shows you it's no big deal, and then you try it. Okay? It doesn't work that easily. It's not, you don't get to overcome your fear or whatever it is all at once, but the therapist models that. Let's say if you have trouble being assertive, the therapist shows you how to be assertive, right? Look, I'm gonna go and you pretend to be your boss and I'll pretend to be you, and I'll show you, this is how you can be assertive with your boss. This is how you ask for a raise. The therapist does that, and then you switch places, right? Now I'll pretend to be your boss and you now try being assertive. That's modeling. The next part of the lecture has to do with cognitive therapies, and then we'll get to, medication and surgery and things like that. But this is a good place to stop. We're about halfway. So I will stop recording.